Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to Stonebelt Presents Giving Up Control, exploring dignity of risk of faith. Exploring dignity of risk in faith communities. We are here with Kathy Webb, and you'll hear more about here in a moment. If you are new to these webinars, we try and do about 4 or 5 a year. I am coming to you from Stonebelt Arc. We are located in Bloomington, Bedford, and Columbus, Indiana. For those of you who may not know Stonebelt is a nonprofit service provider that offers a wide range of support services for people with intellectual and or developmental disabilities, as well as neurodivergent folks. So we, like I said, we're located in Bloomington, Bedford, Columbus, Indiana, which is like south central Indiana. And we do offer now spiritual support programs. We're one of very few that offer that. And part of that is offering these webinars to you to help provide education and discussion regarding faith and spirituality. And in that intersection with people with intellectual developmental disabilities. We offer these to you for free. It looks like my slides are on timed and so I'll need to go change that real quick. But we do offer these for free. So I'm going to stop sharing these while I keep talking. So we do offer these webinars for free. And part of that is that we ask that for you to donate if that is possible for you to do so. I will send a link in the chat here in a moment. Let me fix this transition time real quick. Looks like try this. And we should be good. And I'm gonna screen share again. All right. So I'm gonna click through these and catch us up. So I'll put that donation link here in the chat box here in a moment. And these, as you can see, these are our upcoming webinars. We did a webinar in March. That will be released at a later date because this is a part of her book tour, Rabbi Julia Watts-Belser's book tour. So that is recorded and will be available on our website, but we've got to wait a little bit longer post her book tour. Today you'll be listening to Dr. Kathy Webb. I am sorry for the change of plans. Dr. Carlos Thompson is not able to be with us today, so we just get more of Kathy. And hopefully we'll invite Carlos Thompson back with us some other time. And then in July, I'll actually be sharing with you, we'll be talking about how to support somebody through end-of-life planning, as we have a tool, a workbook tool that you can walk with somebody with an intellectual developmental disability through their end-of-life planning, kind of easy to understand, and kind of walks through the planning stages and what all those choices mean so that they can make educated decisions. September is to be determined. I'm still working on that. And then in November, we'll have our annual Stories of Belonging. So that will be presented by people with intellectual developmental disabilities themselves, and they'll be sharing stories of how they're experiencing belonging in their faith communities. You can always find past webinars in all our past years. I think we've been doing this for 3 or 4 years. I've lost count. And so you can look at all past webinars on our website as well. And we do have a few tools that we hope to add more tools and resources to that website soon. Finally, I think I know many of you know how to use Zoom by now, but in case you don't, or in case your settings are a little different today, you will find that your microphone is muted. So you can, so there isn't that opportunity to ask your questions orally. However, I do invite you all to put in the chat who you are, where you come from, maybe why you're here, anything that you want people to know. And that's really just for networking or communication and social interaction. And then you can also use the Q&A section for questions. You can do that during, but we will also have a Q&A section at the end. And we can answer and really just have a back and forth conversation with Kathy and your questions for her. And finally, we have closed captioning. Closed captioning is available. You can turn those on or off. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen. And without further ado, I introduce you to Kathy Webb, Dr. Kathy Webb. She is a disabled scholar who is interested in lived experiences of disabled people in community, especially faith communities. She has earned a doctorate in disability studies from the University of Illinois at Chicago. She is currently an assistant professor in communication sciences and disorders. And there goes my slides again. I'll fix that here in a moment. Sorry, Kathy. And currently she is the coordinator of the disability minor at Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois. I hope I got that all right, Kathy.
You have, thank you, Sarah. So I'll let you fix the independent slide transitions, and we'll just introduce myself a little further. So like it said, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm just going to describe myself visually in case anybody on the call would benefit from that. So I am a white woman with brown hair that's currently pulled back in a ponytail. I have glasses on and a blouse that is covered in white flowers with kind of a blue background, and I'm sitting in my office at work. So there's a giant bookshelf behind me, and if you see this like weird thing over my shoulder, it's a terrarium with a hanging air plant that kind of looks like a jellyfish. So that's what's happening in the window back there, in case that's confusing to people. So yeah, I'm really happy to be joining you all today. I do have some experience working in a group home. When I was in graduate school, I worked at a house with 10 people who had intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I have spent a lot of time in churches as well. So we're going to try to bridge some of that while we're talking about dignity of risk today. So I just want to get us started with some basics. What is it? Why do we care about it? And how do we apply it to faith communities is kind of the trajectory that we're going on. So dignity of risk is a concept that was created by Robert Persky in the 1970s. And basically, it's this idea that individuals should be allowed the dignity of making their own choices. That having the ability to make one's own decisions or set one's own goals is part of like what we as humans should have. So this is basically a human right that we have the ability to make our own choices, to decide what's right for us, to take risks, which hopefully are informed, and we're making good choices in our lives. But this is a thing that is something that all of us have experienced doing. And it is a very typical thing for people to direct their own lives in this way. So if we're thinking about dignity of risk, part of what we're thinking about is who's the boss or who's in charge of this person's life, who's allowing the choices to be made. Is it ourselves? Is it somebody else making choices for us? Who's in charge? And since we are supposed to be responsible for our own actions, hopefully we're the ones in charge of our own lives, that we're the one who's making decisions with the assistance of our community as is appropriate, but that we're not directing the lives of other people, specifically once people reach adulthood. Please direct your 2- and 3-year-olds. think about it contextually. So I have an image on the screen that is a bunch of yellow flowers with some green leaves, and it says disability rights are human rights. And I believe that dignity of risk is part of that. So rather than me prattling on forever about what dignity of risk is, I wanted to find, if I could, an opportunity for people from the intellectual and developmental disability community to tell you that. And so I found a video that I thought does a really great job. So we're going to watch that, and then we'll rejoin chatting together. Hopefully Sarah can get it to work.
Dignity of risk, you learn by living. Trying new things and making mistakes is all a part of how we learn and grow as people. Without ever being given the chance to take risks in life, people are not able to achieve all they dream and desire. Doing new things is the way we learn about the world and learn more about ourselves and others. It is the way we figure out what is important to us in our lives. There is an idea called dignity of risk, you may have heard about. It is about the basic human right to make your own decisions, to take risks, to live a life you choose. Even if you have a guardian, you still get to have dignity of risk. Dignity of risk is exercising your right to make informed decisions, considering potential risks as well as your hopes, dreams, and goals. Informed decision-making is when you can look at all the options to make a decision and know your rights and freedoms in making your own decisions. People who care about us like to see us healthy and safe. But sometimes this can make them overprotective. But sometimes they have to let us figure it out on our own. There was a man named Robert Persky, who said, "Many of our best achievements came the hard way. We took risks, fell, suffered, picked ourselves up, and tried again. Sometimes we made it, and sometimes we did not. But, we were given the chance to try." Robert believed, people with disabilities have the same right to learn through taking risks, as everyone else. He called this idea, dignity of risk. Is risk bad? Risk is really part of everyday life, for all people. Risk involves not being sure of what's going to happen. There is a chance a person could be hurt. Crossing the street, in a crosswalk, with a traffic light, is a risk, but many people take this risk every day, without anything bad happening. Some risks, everyone would agree, are very bad. For example, stepping off the roof of a 10-story building would be a very bad decision. A similar risk, though one not everyone would agree is bad, is stepping out of an airplane at 10,000 feet with a parachute on. Even after taking lessons on skydiving, I'm choosing to keep my feet on the ground. But that's my choice. What is important is that you have the right to decide which risks you feel are okay to take. You have the right to have the support you need to make decisions and do what you want to do. People should not make decisions for you. They should help you make your own decisions instead. We can all use a little help sometimes in making decisions. Some people make decisions on their own. Other people might ask for help from family or friends. Did you know that you have the right to make decisions that other people feel are unwise, or that they disagree with? Sometimes people who love you may not agree with your choices, because they may be worried you will get hurt, or not want to see you fail. Many times, well-meaning family, friends, and support staff feel like you need more help than you want, and may put restrictions in place they believe will keep you healthy and safe. We know they mean well, but the people who support you should listen to you about what you need and want. They should encourage you to follow your dreams and desires, and should give you the supports and services you need to reach your goals. You can ask your family, friends, and support staff to sit down with you, so you can talk about things you would like to try. Maybe new places to go for fun, something new to learn, or a different place to live or work. Ask them to help you look at all your options, and to think about and plan for risks. How to be as safe as possible, while still doing what you want to do. You can also join a self-advocacy group to learn how to speak up. No one's life is risk-free, and often we learn the most when we try something and fail, or make a mistake. People's needs and wants change over time as we learn and grow, so choices you make today might be different than choices you make 5 years from now, after you have had an opportunity to take risks, have experiences, and learn from your success, as well as from your mistakes. After all, we all learn by living. This video was made by the ITD MLTSS workgroup. You can find more resources like this at our website, c-q-l.org/mltss.
Thank you, Sarah. Can you go to the next slide as well? So we have this opportunity to take chances and to make mistakes, and it's a part of who we are. And part of what Persky recognized in making this concept of dignity of risk is that there is oftentimes overprotection, particularly of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I will note that Persky was writing in the 70s, so this was before our change in language. So if you look at any of his documents, like the one that's linked here, he uses old terminology instead of intellectual and developmental disability. So just fair warning if you go look up anything that he's written. But he said, overprotection endangers the person's human dignity and tends to keep them from experiencing the normal taking of risks in life, which is necessary for normal human growth and development. And so I think that one of the key things here is that when we think about allowing people to make choices and take risks, it is a typical part of development. And Sarah, if you go to the next slide, thank you. So we know that we learn through doing and through trying and through failing. And that means that there are consequences to the actions that we take. And that's for all of us, right? We can't do things without having consequences. And sometimes those consequences are negative. We can get hurt, and not just bodily, but our feelings can get hurt. I don't know about you, but I've gotten lost before when I made a poor choice. People experience heartbreak. There's lots of different possibilities of things that could go wrong. But most things don't have severe consequences. And it's those things with severe consequences that we want to be more cautious of. But people should be allowed to make choices that don't have those like life-endangering consequences, because that is a part of our humanity. And if they make choices that have positive consequences, there's great gain that comes from that. You might learn that you can do something you didn't know you could. You could develop a new skill or new friendships, confidence, your quality of life improves. People generally are more satisfied when they have control over their own life. So this idea of mitigating all risks is actually restrictive on all individuals who have that for them, because it doesn't allow them to see these positive consequences, because they're not seeing any consequences, whether those are negative or positive. So we want to try to make sure that we are able to think about what could come from this that's good, just as much as what might go wrong when we think about risks that people are taking. The link there is just a resource sheet. If you, I don't know if you give out slides afterwards, Sarah, but
yes,
it's
I
just a
will
link
be
to
emailing out a PDF version of all of
Great.
this. So you all will have all of these slides and the links available to you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so that's just a research that I found that was a quick fact sheet on it that I thought was useful. So when we're thinking about taking risks, I think we often forget that we started doing this when we were really young. I have an image here of a young child playing on a playground, and they are barefooted and walking across a whole bunch of bent bars that are suspended above the ground. Um, I have nieces and nephews who, when they were really little, they would go do things on the playground that would make my heart flutter a little bit. But we let them do it because we need them to have the opportunity to learn how to take good risks and not make poor choices. And so we start this process in childhood for most individuals. We teach them what kind of risks we should take, what kind of risks we should be more cautious about, how do we go about doing things. But we don't always do that for all people. And so we have some people who were taught to try things and to explore what's new and enjoy that. And we have other people who were never given that freedom. So I think about even my own self. My mom was terrified, I think, that we were going to fall out of a tree. So we were never allowed to climb trees when we were little. And to this day, I'm in my 40s and I look at a tree and I go, I wish I knew how to climb that, but I'm not going to do it now. Like I'm a little old for that to happen safely. But like we I come from a very risk averse family, and so we were taught to really think through our consequences, to the point where like some of my family members struggle with trying new foods or things that are really simple that aren't really true risks, because we weren't taught how to evaluate well what is a risk we should try and what is something that is actually dangerous for us. You can climb the tree, but maybe don't go to the top, was not a narrative that we had. So I think it's important that we think about how we're taught to take risks or not. And particularly for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, oftentimes they're not taught this. And part of that just comes from the fact that there's so many other things going on that parents or guardians are doing the best they can with what they have, and don't necessarily have time to teach risk taking in appropriate ways. So we might see adults who don't know how to make good decisions and might need some more support in that because they didn't have that opportunity growing up and they didn't develop that skill. What we do know is that the risks we are willing to take can really influence us as we become adults. For many of us, like, we might stay in a job we hate because it's too risky to change to a different job, right? Where we don't know if we're going to have the salary that we need or the benefits that we need. Or we might not feel comfortable taking a vacation because we might need that money for an emergency, right? Like, we're always calculating risks and thinking about what's worth it and what's not. So this is something that we're doing all of the time. And I think sometimes when we think about taking chances or risks, we're thinking about like the big things, right? Like skydiving, right? Oh, it might be life threatening. Like, I'm going to do that. Like, I have to have a really good reason for it. But we have so many everyday common risks. I have a food intolerance. And so for me, like, sometimes going to a new restaurant is a risk because I don't know if they're using common fryer oil and I'm going to get sick because I decided to have French fries, even though it's not the thing I'm allergic to. So I'm taking a risk just by trying something new. Or gosh, making friends as an adult, that's a risk, right? Like, there are so many things that we're doing from day to day where we are challenging what we believe or pushing back against something that someone else wants us to do. We're taking risks constantly, and we don't necessarily think about the choices that we're making as risks unless we're thinking about it in terms of somebody else. So I think it's important for us to be thinking about ourselves in that, like, we oftentimes, when we're working with people who have intellectual or developmental disabilities, we have kind of almost a double standard between the risks we would allow ourselves to take and the risks that we're willing to let others take. So I think that's something that can be useful for us to think of here. Sarah, if you can go to the next slide. So I think most of us don't think of our faith spaces as a risky place, but if we're talking about risk as making choices that could have consequences, then wow, faith-based spaces have a lot of risks. So I was sitting there going, you know, what risks could I think of related to faith? And so I came up with a pretty good list, I think. Um, so even just choosing which faith you want to be a part of, exploring your faith, growing in it, those are risks that we take. Gosh, choosing a congregation, every time I move, it's the worst part, right? Like I have to figure out where I'm going to go now. And, you know, am I going to feel okay in this space? Is this a good fit for me? Do I like the preaching here? Right? We're taking chances by trying things out. Similarly, like what programs am I going to participate in or not participate in? I've definitely, as a woman, been in spaces where it was assumed I would participate in certain programs, and it was like, actually don't have much interest in that, but thank you. And that's a risk, right? To be like, oh, it's not really something I would enjoy. I was thinking too about worship, and I have an image on the screen of a bunch of different hands in different prayer positions. So some are open handed, some are fingers intertwined, some are hands pressed together. You know, we all have different stances and postures when we pray, not to mention when worship music plays. I came from a church, I grew up in a church where you did not raise your hands or you went to church discipline. And now I go to churches where people are like moving all of the time, and people make very different decisions about how they're going to participate in that worship. And one of my favorite stories is about a friend of mine who has Down syndrome, and he is a really, really good air guitar player. Like he's right on the beat. Like I don't know if anyone's ever given him a real guitar, but he would really rock it. And so during worship, he would play his air guitar, and he would very kindly step out of the line of chairs and into the aisle to play so that he didn't accidentally hit anybody when he was strumming. You know, very courteous, very kind. But there were people in the church who were very concerned that he was not worshiping in the way that we were supposed to worship. And so we had to have a conversation about how they need to stretch themselves, for one thing, but also like he has the right to make the choice to worship how he wants to worship, and he's being very courteous in how he's doing it. And so we need to adjust our expectations as a conversation and allow him to continue to make that choice to worship in a way that's meaningful to him. So other things that are risky: rites, communion, baptism, marriage, all things that are definitely a risk for all populations in some ways. I know the churches that I go to are churches that primarily practice immersion for baptism. And for many people, the idea of getting their head dunked underwater is a risk. In addition to the scariness of professing in front of a congregation what you believe. So there's multiple levels there. And then we see things around communicating with others. Who do we actually turn to and greet during those awkward times where they tell us to talk to the person next to us? Who do we make friendships with? Transportation, you got to get yourself to and from church. That's something Sarah obviously knows a lot about. But that can be a risk, as well as giving. Like, how much money do I have to give? How much time do I have to give? And serving as well. Like, where do I want to serve? How do I want to serve? How often do I want to serve? These are all choices that we're making all of the time. And for some people, in some circumstances, these are risky in the traditional sense, as well as in the sense of there could be consequences that I might need to face. So just to shift a little bit, one of the questions that Sarah and I talked through before this was thinking about, in faith-based spaces, how do we ensure that we're keeping people with disabilities, particularly people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, safe when they are out with congregations or out in faith-based spaces, and whether or not having legal waivers was something that is of use. And I am, as I mentioned earlier, a relatively risk-averse person myself. But I do not believe that waivers are useful in most things. So what I would ask that we think through is, what kind of risk are we talking about here? Is it an assumed everyday risk? Just like every other congregant is going to come, they have to transport themselves, they have to choose where they're going to sit, whether or not they're going to have communion, if they're going to have coffee, what kind of coffee they're going to have. All of those things that are the normal everyday operations of our organization shouldn't require a waiver for anybody. So it shouldn't require a waiver for somebody with intellectual or developmental disabilities either. Now, that said, there are times where we have things where you are assuming unusual risk. I used to help out with high school youth groups, and we took a trip one time where we went whitewater rafting. Let me tell you, everybody signed a waiver. Right? So when we're thinking about those kinds of things where we are setting things up, everybody needs to sign a waiver because there is some safety risk here. Then we're going to include our friends with intellectual and developmental disabilities in that, just like the rest of the congregation. So we shouldn't be needing a special waiver for individuals unless that happens to be the policy of where they're living or their family or some other entity outside of the faith-based space. There is an assumption of risk in everyday life, and that's basically what we're operating on here. So what we want to do, though, is, stay back there for a second, Sarah, sorry. We want to learn how to support people really wisely. So thinking about, how do we protect ourselves, whether that's the individual or the congregation or the agency, as well as that individual, while also allowing them to make choices, have autonomy, and not find themselves having to sign a million waivers because they just want to go to church. Now you can change slides. So when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, how do we help support people wisely? Communication is like 100% the key here. And that's not just my speech therapy background talking. We need to be talking with the individual, especially that person with intellectual and developmental disabilities has insights for us about their own lives. And then we should talk to guardians or service providers as appropriate, but we should always approach that person first. And the trick sometimes is like, what actually should we ask, or what do we need to think about? So for me, I think, what do we need to know in order to support that person safely? So we don't want an extensive health history of every individual coming into our church. That's information that one can't safely collect and maintain, but also like isn't pertinent to the information that would be required to support somebody well.
And I would say that includes like diagnoses. Like,
yeah,
a diagnosis isn't really necessarily going to tell you much anyway. What do you like? What are those limitations? What are the specific things that you need to know? You don't necessarily need to know the list of diagnoses.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things about diagnoses that drive me just make my brain go is the fact that they don't tell much information because each person is so very different. So it's typically not helpful to just ask for someone's diagnoses. I worked at a camp for adults with disabilities for a really long time, and you'd get a diagnosis and people would be like, okay, so you know what to do with them, right? I'd be like, no, I don't. Like, I need a significantly bigger amount of information that is not that. So I think it's useful to sit down with that person and the relevant individuals in their lives and ask specifically, what support needs do you have around this area? And so areas I think are important to ask about would be mobility, right? Is this somebody who walks on their own? Is this somebody who uses a wheelchair or a cane or a walker? Is this somebody who walks on their own but is prone to falling over? Like, is there anything that you need to know in terms of how they move from space to space? Toileting is a big one to just check in on. no people at a church should be helping with toileting. That's something that should be somebody who's trained to do that. But it would be helpful to know if they need a support person for that, or if that's somebody who's able to completely take care of themselves independently. How do they communicate? Do they use words, sign language, a communication board, an electronic device? What method of communication? And if there's anything in particular you should know about. For example, I used to hang out with a teenager who had Down syndrome who spoke but didn't speak particularly clearly. And so we had a couple of conversations with him and his parents about specific words that I could learn to recognize, as well as like gestures and things that he would use when he was not able to communicate clearly. So we could kind of work that out ahead of time. Sensory needs are a big one. Is this somebody who would benefit from having a quieter space or dimmer lights? Lots of different things like, do you want to have a fidget on hand or something else that would be useful in that space? I think foods and allergies are a big one, especially as many of our faith spaces have coffee and donuts or snacks or like potlucks or whatever it is. So knowing if somebody has a food allergy is something that is useful, I think, for the whole congregation. Truthfully, I would advocate that you ask your whole congregation if there are food allergies to be considerate about, but maybe that's just because I have a food allergy. So, making sure that people will be safe that way. And then emergency contact, like if something were to happen for this person, who do I contact, right? Maybe they are their own guardian and they're like, nobody, it's just me. Or maybe it's, oh yeah, call mom or dad or call the group home. What is the procedure if somebody would need something? Do they have an emergency alert bracelet that the health people would look at if they need it? Like having that information can be really useful. But we also want to think about this information as something that like not the whole world needs to know. This is something that we want to think about, who do we share this with appropriately and keeping it private. We don't want to have like weird medical information files on people. We just want to make sure that we know enough to keep people safe and happy. Yeah, and then what don't we need to know is a full health history. There's no need for that. And then intimate life details, no one should be privileged to unless you are really good friends with them and they choose to share with you. So that should not be a part of the questions that you're asking in terms of this. So yeah, I think if we ask ourselves, what am I concerned about in terms of risk? Am I exaggerating it? And sometimes the easiest way to kind of assess that is to think, would I be concerned for myself or for my friend if we were talking about this? And then what are the consequences? Maybe they good or bad? And is the person aware of them and willing to accept them, right? So if we're talking about, like, say, transportation, and you're going to accept a ride from somebody and they're aware that sometimes car accidents happen, but they want to go to church, they should get a ride, right? No one's going to set out to have a car accident. That's not how people work. So as long as you're aware of the consequences and those consequences are something that person is willing to accept, then they should be allowed to make that risk. So the final thing I want to leave you with is this thought of like, how do I assess risk? So Sarah, you can swap slides. So the questions I would ask myself is, what's the probability of my concern being realized? Is this a really high level, this is definitely going to happen concern, in which case, what can I do or what can we do as an organization to put a plan in place to help it not happen? And perhaps that's something that would be true for everybody. So again, food allergy person, I went to a chili cook-off. I didn't eat a single thing because they did not have labels on all the food with what was in there. But had they labeled everything, I could have participated in the event, right? So they could have mitigated that by having food labels on things. If it's a low concern of being realized, then just be prepared to support somebody as they're learning through that process. But if there's a chance of harm, this changes a little bit. If there's a high chance, we definitely want to keep it from happening. And if there's a low chance, but it's harm, then we're going to work our best to make sure that that person doesn't have that happen, that we can prevent it, or that we have a plan in place to support them were they to experience that harm. So we want to think about harm reduction here, but for the most part, the majority of things that we're going to be dealing with, those everyday life things, are not things that are actually going to be hurtful to people. And so we have much more freedom to support their autonomy and to help them to make informed choices so that they can live their lives and learn just like everybody else is doing. So with that, I'll end. And Sarah, if you want to come back and join me. You're muted, Sarah.
When I love your questions on some of that prepping or that assessing and kind of knowing what questions might be appropriate questions to ask in those slides. I'm reminded, that helps so much. And because might be things that might cause us anxiety or fear, but it's their norm. So like one example is I might be afraid to take somebody who has seizures out and about, but in their mind, this is, that's their norm. They have a procedure, they know what to do, they know what they need if they have a seizure and what that protocol is. And so that is new and kind of strange for me, but for them, that's their normal life. Here's the procedure. And when I have a conversation with them and know, actually, these are the types of seizures. I just kind of stand there and I freeze and I don't even drop. And you just need to wait until I'm done and then I'm good to go. And I'm going to be really tired after. So I need somewhere to sit down and rest. Now I know it's not a drop seizure, and maybe we're not talking about like being at big risk for injury or fall, or maybe it is, but they have a whole protocol around it to help with that. And so by having that conversation, I'm able to find more of that information out and realize it's actually no big deal. This is so normal that it doesn't really interfere with my life so much. And then I'm able to, then it's so much, we can actually work together. So I really like that dialogue is so important.
Yeah, and I mean, this is something that people with disabilities are often navigating. I just had a student in one of my classes tell me, hey, I'm prone to passing out. Don't call 911 unless I'm out for longer than this amount of time.
Right.
Like, okay, cool, right? Like, because I mean, if this person had passed out in class, the average instructor would be like, oh no, I need help. But this person was like, hey, I know my disability. This is going to happen. When it does, here's what we do about it. And so we're just, giving the same opportunity to people who typically aren't given the opportunity to express that and say, yeah, I'm aware. This is how I live my life. Let's just do the life thing. So yeah, that's a great example of someone with a seizure. Because people do get freaked out.
And I can, for those of you who don't know, I just did my dissertation and it's specifically on transportation. So that's kind of my, where my brain has been. But in a lot of the tools that I created, it really is getting all of that information. What do you need in order to get transportation so that I know I can get the people with the right vehicle? So if you have a walker that you need to collapse and get in a car, I know to not give you like a small car that doesn't have a space for your walker. Or if you can't climb up into a tall vehicle, I'm not going to give you a driver who has a big truck. I'm going to find somebody with a sedan. But those types of conversations, as long as you can kind of get that information, then you can have a great plan to move forward that really minimizes even those low risks, to where they're not really anything because everybody knows what to do.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's some of the thing I think about with food intolerances and things too. Like I have a relatively mild food intolerance, but there is a child at my church who basically could die if we bring peanuts in. And so all of us know that this child might die if we bring peanuts in. So nobody's bringing peanuts in, right? So having those conversations where we're caring for our community should become much more normal than I think it already is. And if we're including people with disabilities in those conversations, then we're just, making sure that everybody is a part and has a part of the plan. We talk about the same thing with children in church. Like nobody is going to let an unaccompanied toddler run out of the building. I hope. Right? Like that's just a part of the way that we care for our congregation. So why is it any different that we wouldn't watch out for each other as adults, right? Without like thinking about it as, oh, they're disabled, I have to watch out for them.
Right.
Like I hope you're caring for the community as a part of the community. So how do we make sure that people are integrated in a way that allows them to make these decisions and to be a part of the things that are going on in a way that's meaningful to them, without it being, oh, well, so and so is special, they need XYZ care, because that's not what we want to see happening, right? We want to give them the opportunity to just be a part of things. And that just takes a little extra knowledge and foresight on the part of the leadership, particularly of a congregation.
We have a question from Dennis. Are there reasons the language of agency and dignity of risk are not used interchangeably? I'm particularly interested in any nuances in meaning.
So in my experience, no, there's not a good reason. I think some of it comes from the idea that Persky was writing in the 70s, right at the start of the deinstitutionalization movement. So we were really starting to see people with intellectual and developmental disabilities moving out of warehouses essentially and more into the community and into smaller group settings. And so there is a huge emphasis at that time just placed on the fact that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities were people. And so having this dignity of risk language was really just being like, hey, this is a human thing. They're humans. They should be given the opportunity to make their own choices and to have that. But they weren't really using the term agency at that time. And so I think perhaps people are using agency more these days. One, because it's less cumbersome than dignity of risk. And two, because perhaps it sounds a little less scary because it doesn't include the word risk. Right. So allowing people to make their own choices is something. We also use self-determination and to talk about that. So there's lots of words we're using kind of to talk around the same thing. And in my experience, it's been changing with time and not so much the meaning of it changing. But I also have not done any big deep dive into this, so I could be wrong.
I would say very similar. I think maybe the nuances is maybe what you're trying to, the point that you're trying to get across. So if people are really talking about, oh, the risks or liability, and people are bringing up all of these fears for safety, then you might talk more about dignity of risk to specifically talk about but there is some dignity in taking risks because they're your own risks to take and make. And so whereas agency and self-determination are kind of, I would use them as more broader terms to talk about just in general, making your own decisions. That's the only difference in how I would maybe discern on when to use what. Is more what's my topic and what's the exact point that I'm trying to make or get across. But they're all similar terms. Absolutely. We've got another question from Becky. I support a person who is resistant to change and tends to be risk averse. I find myself pushing new things on him because I feel like he otherwise would have a much more limited life. He is 30 now, and our process now is me. Okay, just listen to my pitch first, and then you can respond. Jimmy, okay. And then if I don't stop and ask him to hear my idea, he would interrupt me at every aspect of the idea to tell me why it won't work. Do you have any other suggestions, or am I on the right track?
Ooh, so for me, some of it depends on what you're pushing. So like if you're trying to get somebody to try a new food, usually that takes less explanation than if you're trying to get them to do a new activity or meet a new person or something that tends to be a little bit more stressful, shall we say, to a lot of people. So I think you are on the right track in that you're asking them to listen to what it is that you're saying without judgment, and then making their opinion known afterwards. I think for many of us who are risk averse, we're running through that list of why it won't work in our heads anyways. But it's a fair communication strategy to say, it's my turn, and then you can tell me what you think about it, but let me finish first. I think that's perfectly acceptable. What I would maybe consider adding is talking to the person about what kind of pushing do they like versus don't like. So I'm somebody who would very happily stay at home with my dog all day, every day. But I have a friend who is like, hey, let's go do this. Hey, let's go do that. I jumped out of a plane for her. She's that convincing. Like, and we've had conversations about this before. And I've said, I'm perfectly content doing what it is that I'm doing. But sometimes I enjoy the fact that she poses these really outrageous things for us to try, because I would never try it without somebody trying it with me, right? Or it's not something that I would have even considered doing. So maybe he likes being encouraged to try new foods, even if he's skeptical about it, but he hates it when you want him to go to some place that's loud and noisy that he doesn't like, right? So maybe you can find out more about which kinds of pushes he appreciates versus which ones he's just like, I'm never, ever going to accept what you have to say about this, which then would save you some time and energy as well, and give that person more agency in terms of deciding where they want to be pushed versus where they're just content, being who they are. So I think it's a great thing to want to expand somebody's worldview. I appreciate that myself. But I also have lines, right? And I'm willing to tell people, like, if you push me on that, I'm just not gonna. I don't do parades. I don't do loud places. Never going to go with you. Sorry. Don't waste your time, right? So finding out those places to not push could be just as helpful as finding out the places to push.
And the only other thing I would add is maybe knowing where, if you know where his goals are. What are his goals? What are the things that he wants in his visions for his future? What are the if he could do anything, or what's most meaningful in his life, if you know those, then that can also be the place that you stem from. So, hey, this is one of your goals. We talked about this, and you said that this is one of your goals. So there's this opportunity that I'd like to talk to you about that would match that goal, I think, really, really well. And we can talk through how that might work safely, or whatever things he's kind of concerned about. And then that way you can connect it to one of his goals that he has already communicated is something that he does want. That also can be because then he knows it's not just something that you're wanting him to do, right. Which can also be more stressful and a sense of pushback. He knows it's coming then from something he's already communicated is important to him.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, sparked in my brain, having a way out can be really helpful too. If someone's going to do something that they're unsure of, to either develop a code word or say, you know what, hey, what, if you're not enjoying this, I will leave with you at any time.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I think people feel the pressure to please the person or to be a good friend or whatever it is, and will stay doing something that may not even be good for them because they want to be that person. So saying up front, you know, if we try this, we don't have to stay the whole time. If you're not enjoying it, we can leave. Like, that's fine. Or, you know, if you try that food and you don't like it, we'll order something else, or we'll swap meals. I'll get something I know you like, and then we can swap plates if you don't like it, you know, whatever. Like, to have a way out that's dignifying and clearly specified can also be really useful if you're trying to get someone who's not keen on new things to try new things.
What other questions do you all have? We've got about 5 more minutes. Anything that you all has happened? Maybe you're supporting people in faith communities. Maybe you are a faith community. Any other conversations? And as you type those in, this again will be, this is recorded, and this will, it's already on Facebook, so you can rewatch it on Facebook, and then it'll also be recorded and put on our website. So you can come back, you can share it with people, you can share it with your congregations or anywhere else. And so, again, that will be on the website. It might take us a little while to get it on there. And then hopefully you come back for our future webinars as well. And it looks like Becky says that's great, to connect it to a goal he already has and to remind him it's related to his goal. And out, yes, helps. Great. Glad that helped, Becky. And I'm going to type in my email address. Please email me if you have any other questions about this or other conversations or questions that you have in regard to connecting people with intellectual developmental disabilities into faith communities, your faith community, or maybe you're a service provider and helping people connect to your clients' faith community. And then last but not least, I will send this out as all of these slides. I'll send these out to you in PDF form in the coming days. And I think that's it. Thank you all for being here. And thank you.
I'm also happy to answer questions. If anyone wants to reach out, you're welcome to.
Wonderful. And her email is also, she just put that in the chat. So please answer any questions, and I can forward your questions on to her as well. Happy to do that. Thank you all so much.